Welcome to the ICOACHKIDS Spotlight series.
We'll be joined by world-leading coaches, researchers and practitioners sharing their expert insights.
All of these insights are to help us in our mission to champion sport policy, education and practice that puts kids first.
Be sure to join us at ICOACHKIDS.org to learn, coach and connect.
So let's dive in.
Welcome back, everybody, to the ICOACHKIDS Spotlight series. Today, we are joined by Shane Pill of Flinders University in Adelaide, Australia. Shane, lovely to have you with us.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and have a chat.
I guess let's get our teeth into things first, and start with what is it that inspired you to get involved in coaching and sport?
Yeah, okay. So what inspired me to get involved in sport was my parents. My parents were very sporty, went to the squash club with them. Mum played midweek squash, ladies tennis. Dad played football at a very high level in South Australia, was club captain. So I grew up around sporting clubs, having a hit with anybody that would want to have a hit. There were no computers, iPads, video games. If you didn't read, draw, you got bored. So I jumped on the court. I can remember being at the squash courts, Alberton squash courts. I've had a hit with Vicky Caldwell, who was just looking for someone to have a warm up with while she was there, just practicing. So as an early adolescent, I was on the court having a hit with a world champion squash player. Similarly, Chris Dittmar, Dad being a league footballer, I'd be having a kick out the back of stadiums with players that he played with that were state players, and I just grew up around sport, and I was an active kid. I wasn't particularly good at sport initially. I was a chronic asthmatic in and out of hospital, so I was the fat asthmatic kid that couldn't get a touch in a game of football and would fill the back pocket in the thirds team. And then when I hit adolescence, I had an early growth spurt. I was an early maturer, lost a lot of weight, suddenly became coordinated, and all those years of just mucking around suddenly paid off in terms of decent sporting performances. Unfortunately, due to injuries, my own playing career didn't last as long as I had hoped. And I guess the other pathway into sport was I was trained as a physical education teacher. And one of the first things they said to us at Underdale Teachers College was, you'll do some of your best teaching work as a sports coach. And as a PE teacher, you'll be the first person the school calls on to coach school teams. But when you become a parent, you'll be the first person the community club calls on to coach the teams as well. So be ready for it. My pathway into first coaching was the first school that I worked at, coaching the year 9s, that's about under 15s, Australian football team. And then the next year I moved to a different school, and they were looking for a first 18 football coach because I played a bit of league football. The deputy principal sided up to me and said, "You're coaching the first 18 team." I said, "Well, that's a bit of a jump from coaching the year 9 team last year. How come?" He said, "Well, because you played league footy, so we'll get you to do it." So I started coaching at under 18 level as a 22-year-old, and not much older than the people that I was coaching. And I've been coaching at community and club level continuously since then.
It's quite interesting there that you said that there was a lot of benefit of what you called mucking around and just playing and being really active as a child. Do you think that's still reflective of children's experiences of sport now, and perhaps some of what those under 15s, under 18s arrive with when they come into your sport?
Absolutely. As I understand the research in this area, it shows fairly clearly that parents initiate children's activity into sport. Children sustain young kids' physical activity through sport and make sport their choice. They're the ones that get the kids to sit on the lounge initially and watch the sport, go to the game. So they are the socializers into sport, and that'll be sustained and maintained by those kids in their peer groups as they get older, if they're in with those people with common interests, and they'll be supported through those common interests. But absolutely, it's parents as primary motivators. There was some terrific research done in South Australia. It's nearly 20 years old, for a Be Active campaign Wendy Schiller was the lead researcher, and that research showed that young kids, 4 or 5-year-olds, they just want to play. It's the adults that take them to a form of play called sport. But the kids in the main are not going there because they want to play sport. The kids are going there because they want to play. They want to play with a football. They want to muck about. There's a certain small number of them that'll go there because they're intrinsically motivated. They've latched onto this and they want to do it. But the vast majority of kids are going to, the equivalent of T20 Blast cricket or AFL Auskick as we have over here, because their parents are taking them there. They don't have the means to take themselves there for a start, but it's the parents that socialise kids into the habit and the love of sport in the first instance. And then there are others, such as school, friends, extended families, that continue that socialisation as they get older.
I find it fascinating about that kids just want to play, and I wonder when does that love for play stop? Because I about 6 or 7 years ago now, I was doing a study with some football clubs in the UK, and they were talking about kids don't arrive with the same skills anymore. They can't create their own games. They don't self-organize well enough. But we stand there in the corner and we try and let them play, and it's like, but you're stood there in the corner in your tracksuit and you're watching them, and they're part of a talent development program. So of course they're going to look to you to tell them what to do, and they're not going to self-organize. I wonder what role sport has to play then to help children just love that playing, and when they create their own rules, and when big kid from down the street decides to start a game, they welcome little Johnny who's 6 years old, and they adapt the rules for them, etc., etc. There's a lot of things that kids can actually do themselves, right, to make sport achievable, lovable, all of the above.
Yeah, we come down to the role of parents again, and I came through an era where you got home from school and you were kicked out of the house again because you'd been sitting down at school all day. Your parents didn't want you coming home in front of the TV. They kicked you outside. There was no option like perhaps kids come home today. There's no parent there to go, you got to get outside and play, because cost of living means that two parents need to work. Cost of housing. Houses are less affordable than what they were when I was young. My parents were young. My grandparents were young. So two parents at work, single parent family, need to work. There isn't somebody there to go get outside and play like there was when I came home. The streets are considered less safe because there's less vehicles on the road. So the street games of cricket, football are not there anymore. Houses take up more of the block, so there's not the backyards, the driveways to play in anymore. So we've socialised the opportunity to play, and it's adults that have socialised the opportunity to play out of kids. So the converse, it's adults that drive the socialising of kids into opportunities to play. I mean, my understanding of the research shows the human condition is to seek the easiest opportunity available, unless you're, that character outsider. So most kids don't necessarily seek to spend that critical period between after school and 6 p.m. when tea starts in physical activity. But that 3:30 to 6 p.m. time slot is historically peak physical activity time. From the time school finished to the time you're called in for tea, go outside and play. And then it's dark and you can come in and do your homework and those sorts of things. Whereas now kids go to after school care and they're picked up when it's dark. They get home, it's dark. Not letting the kids go outside because it's dark. We haven't adjusted opportunities for play as a result of the different social dynamics that we now experience compared to older generations. And there is a lot of research to suggest that young people today are less physically capable than their great-grandparents because of that decrease in the opportunity to range and roam and play and fall and pick yourself up and do it again.
I wonder then if that amount of time available to play, or seemingly available to play for kids, is limited, then what responsibility do schools and sports clubs have to create those positive experiences for children in sport?
Well, if school is where their experience of sport is, then it's the remit of the sports coordinator, the sports coaches, to provide the opportunity to progress people towards progressive self-determination and self-responsibility and self-motivation. So if I return to Mostyn's spectrum of teaching styles and the idea that all coaching styles have utility, the skill of the coach is knowing when to match a teaching style to the task intention for the outcome you want for the player. We can, using a intentional cluster of coaching styles, over time, enable people to be more self-motivated, self-directed, and self-responsible. But if we adopt a narrow cluster of coaching styles in the area that Mostyn called reproduction styles, and that's the research tells us that most coaching is still in that command and practice style of coaching, high level of coach verbalization, getting the players to replicate what the coaches are demonstrating, explaining, and performing themselves as a model of practice. So the role of the player is to replicate in practice that demonstration, explanation, and model of performance. Well, that doesn't move them towards independent, self-regulated learners. That moves them towards being able to reproduce models of practice prescribed by the coach. So instrumental in driving that capacity for independent, self-regulated learners or self-determined learners is the coaching style made up of the cluster of teaching styles that the coaches choose, or maybe unintentionally, depending upon their philosophy, adopt with their playing groups.
I wonder then what are the challenges that coaches face in not only understanding these teaching styles and different pedagogies, but being brave enough to try these, because I guess the easy fix, right, is to go command and conquer. But we know that isn't necessarily benefit for not only children, but just humans in general, engaged in sport and education. So what are the challenges that coaches face in trying these things?
If you're the volunteer coach who's been carpentering all day, coaching something you do because you're available, you're interested, and you'll commit to it, but coaching's not your profession. If we want a different type of coaching that enables a different type of outcome, then we need to put in the education into the coaches. So it's a balance between coaching as a profession and recognizing that coaching is an educative endeavor. The good sports coaching looks a lot like good physical education teaching. As a former school teacher, I know that teaching science is about discovery. Science through formulating a hypothesis, designing an experiment, and testing that it works. It's a discovery learning idea. Now, I don't necessarily have to teach science for that scientific method. I can teach scientific content, just like a sports coach can teach the content of their sport through command and practice style. But if I want people to think like a scientist, I need a different cluster of teaching styles. I was at a professional development by Edward Bloom one time. Absolutely fascinating. He put this tie up, and I can't remember the exact question that he asked, and then he put up the answers. And he asked people to guess the age of the people that have provided these creative answers using synthesis and evaluation thinking. And people guessed anywhere between 18 and 24 years of age, and high achieving students. And he said these were people with an intellectual challenge, aged around about 12 to 14 years of age. Like, no way capable of that. He said, no, we gave them the tools to be able to think in the way that they were able to deliver these answers. So there are ways of thinkings that I took away from that can be learnt, like any skill can be learnt. But coaches aren't trained to do that. So coaches will coach the way they were coached. So we get this self-replicating culture of coaching, which is really hard to disrupt because there is no other model of practice for them to look around at. So we're at this really interesting tension point between recognizing sports coaching as an educative endeavor, very similar to physical education teachers. Physical education teachers are there with a 4-year degree. Sports coaches often are the parent, the grandparent that's available, the eldest child that is available, upright breathing and having played the sport, and willing to get involved and do it. So we get the outcomes based on the level of competency, not in a pejorative sense, but the level of competency that they bring is the level of competency we get.
And I really appreciate that analogy of science, because I think this term, it's science, is often misconstrued as it just being black and white and right and wrong, but actually it is the output of something that is very experimental, trying things, and actually even in coming to that conclusion, that eventually will become fallible as people experiment and go on again. I wonder what, obviously, given your recent book around Mostyn's teaching styles, I wonder what is it that you would recommend for coaches to do in terms of making sure that children get that balance and blend of all of those different teaching styles, and also have those opportunities to experiment and understand what sport means for them, opportunity to not only problem set but problem solve, etc., etc.
Yeah, great question. And immediately I'm thinking, as a teacher, because that's my background, if you don't know the kids, you can't plan for the outcomes. So the first thing you have to do is know the kids. There's the character piece in that and what drives them to be there in the first place. There's also understanding where their challenge point is at. So there's data around their technical abilities, the way they're thinking about the game, the movement toolkit that they bring with them to the game. Any time that we go in there and we have every player, every minute of every training session doing exactly the same thing, we are implying that every one of those players is at exactly the same point of development, which when we're dealing with kids, we know is a nonsense. We know that they physically mature at different rates. They cognitively mature at different rates. They emotionally mature at different rates. So from the character piece, we've got different starting points. From the technical and tactical development piece and the volume of practice, the kids that are out there with a parent that's having a run and a jump and a kick and a catch and a hit and a bat with them, they're accumulating hours and hours and hours and hours of more practice, in the most loose sense of that term, than the kid that's only going to training. So of course they're going to have accelerated development. And in addition, because they've got a parent who's doing that, the parent's probably thinking about it and throwing in some tips as well, which also helps to further accelerate their development, because they're not just retrieving existing skill sets, they've probably got a parent in there trying to nudge them towards being a little bit better at the same time. And then you have the character piece by the kids that, I call the other players, who think, I need to be better. I'm going to hang a tennis ball in a stocking in the garage and work on my cut shot. They're accumulating thousands of hours of additional practice that the kids who only go to practice are not getting. So of course, they're going to be further ahead in their development. So we need to be able to differentiate the practice experience to meet the multiple needs of the kids. So I encourage coaches to think in terms of trying to cluster people that are at similar development points, and to think discerningly around what is the purpose of having everybody train together. And in an invasion sport, that's really quite straightforward. We need to be able to get on the same page in terms of our understanding of what we're trying to do, to bring a level of predictability to what's inherently unpredictable. So if we have action rules around particular scenarios, we give ourselves a tactical advantage because of that strategy. Because I'm predicting my teammate will do this because this is what we've practiced at training. That gives us an advantage over the defender that doesn't know that we're about to do that. But then other times when we're working at increasing the personal competencies of the individuals, we need to break up into differentiated practice based on where they are. So for example, that might mean thinking about a particular game that we want to use to teach a concept. What's the scale back for those that are not ready? What's the scale up for our more advanced players? So we've got 3 levels of challenge point happening in the practice session.
I wonder then it's great there to start to think about the individuals that arrive, the small human beings that are there, and the difference that is there for them, whether that be physically, technically, tactically, etc., etc. But also, are there cultural challenges in terms of people's access to sport and the way that they understand sport and engage with it? Obviously, there are challenges that are very specific to Australia, for example. I wonder if you can offer some insight there.
That's a quite a perceptive question, and I'll answer it by reflecting on a conversation that I had with a coach who was at the ICC Cricket Academy in Dubai, and he'd come from Australia. Let's just, for the sake of it, call Australia. First colour I look at up here is yellow. So Australia is a yellow country. Now, in Australia, we don't make stuff anymore. We're a high wage, high knowledge economy. So therefore, our education system is different from an economy that is preparing people to work making stuff. So if you're on a factory line, there is no creativity required. You are producing that thing in that way according to the model. So we've shifted very heavily towards creativity, synthesis, evaluation, analysis in the expectations of our curriculum and where we're trying to take the kids. That's the evolution of where we are. Culturally, there's a fair bit around developing the capacity of the individual to be the best person they can be. Now, if you're that sort of coach, you're going to be using a lot of inquiry strategies, a lot of self-responsibility, age-appropriate responsibility and self-determination. You're going to be thinking about, how do I make these people's thinking visible? Because if I don't make these players thinking visible, I don't know what I'm working with. I might be telling them stuff they already know, and there's a misalignment between intentions as a consequence. Now, as a coach, if I go work in a cultural setting, which is around respect to those that are more knowledgeable. So therefore, there is the expectation that the more knowledgeable other tells me what to do. And it is the ultimate show of respect that I acknowledge that and I do it. Well, that's creating a cultural tension. If I come in and start asking lots of questions, they're going, it's not your role to ask me a question. It's your role to tell me what to do. It's your role to show me how to do better. I've lost respect. It looks like I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm asking them. I'm the one that should know it. What am I asking them for? They don't know it, is what they're thinking. So yes, to me, I'd bring the analogy back to if we go into a school and we want to change the curriculum. We don't go into a school and change secondary school. We don't go and change 7, 8, 9, 10 straight away, because the year 9s and 10s that have been there for 4 years will go, what are you doing? This is not how we do things. Who are you? You're the new person. You're here 6 minutes. We've been here 6 years. Don't tell us how to do things, So you come in at the entry point and you change them. And then the next year they move up a year and you change that year. Then the next year. So by the time you're 5 years into it, there's a whole new culture. Nobody knows any different, but you start with that first entry point and move them through. So you have to have a process of bringing the cultures together. Otherwise, you lose people. And that was the lesson that I learned from talking to someone who has done that at a international level and tried to manage let's say, Australia being a yellow culture going into another culture, which is more about showing respect and deference to the person who knows. And that's the person who is the coach, and the coach's role is to tell them what to do. Let's call that a blue country. Well, you've got yellow and blue coming together. You want to try and make it green, not the other group, yellow.
And I guess that's part of the challenge for coach educators and coach developers, right? Because they get coaches in who have either learned through their experience of sport, or the version of education that they've received and digested has been one of those things where it might be, well, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that's even more challenging when you're working with, perhaps, I mean, this is one of my own personal reflections of working in higher education in the UK, is that you get undergraduate students who are starting to try and think of the world as grey, and there's lots of different opportunities as long as you justify all of those different pieces of knowledge which are tentative, but they've just come through a schooling system, right? That is, you need to pass this exam to get to this point, and so to pass this exam you need to know A, B, C and D, and it's a massive tension, and I think at times those worlds need to speak to one another to help get to a lovely analogy there, Shane, about to that green point of view, because yellow's never going to become blue and blue's never going to become wholly yellow. So I love that, and I wonder, I do start to wonder what we can do as a coach development community to help find that blend of colours.
Yeah, and a little bit of that is change theory. You don't come in and go, bang, everything's changed, unless you're prepared for the walkout. and then to rebuild from there. The best leaders I've worked with and the understanding of change management I have is you walk in and you sit in a place and you come to understand it. And then you come to think about the sequence of change that brings people with you. Whereas I see a lot of coaches come in and it's almost like they've had the Damascus experience. They've been knocked off the horse, they've heard the voice, and they're now on a path to revolutionize everybody, whether they're with them or they're not. You must change because I've had the Damascus experience, so you will have it too. It doesn't work. It puts a lot of people offside. And I think our role as coach developers is to work with people and bring them on a process to get them to be better tomorrow than what they are today. But we have to meet them where they're willing to invest.
Absolutely. And a part of that is you've got to mutually trust one another as well, that you both have each other's best interests at heart. Shane, at the end of every ICOACHKIDS spotlight, we ask 3 quick fire questions.
Yep.
That, as we've said before, they're quick for me to ask, but they're not necessarily quick for our guests to answer. But the first of those is, what is good coaching to you?
To borrow a phrase, it depends. It depends on the age that you're teaching. It depends on the development of the group that you're teaching. It can depend on the culture and the sport that you're teaching. So I'm reluctant to say that there is a best way of coaching. The best way of coaching is one that helps the kids, your players, your adults, whoever they might be better tomorrow than what they are today. And that winds us back to what before. There are some really sound educational principles that have over 100 years of research behind them. Alan Launder used to talk about P's of perfect pedagogy, I think he originally called them, post-test. Well, if you don't have post-test, you don't have data to know where you're building from. So you can't help the individual construct a better version of themselves if we don't know where we're starting from. So there is no one way to think about it. The change that I've observed from a theoretical perspective, and I will put the asterisks on this by saying I'm not a sports scientist, so I'll talk in educational terms, not sports science terms. We used to talk about coaching from a behaviourist paradigm where the role of the coach was the expert and the role of the player was to learn what the expert was showing them. So the role of the player was to behave. We moved to a constructivist paradigm, which has both the social and the cognitive dimension, recognizing that the individual operates within a community. So there's a club, and within that there's a grade. So there's going to be social influences that are different depending upon what your social context. It's also the cognitive experience. I don't know the world that you're experiencing. I can't experience the world the same way that you do because I haven't had your experiences. I'm not the same height as you, so I experience the world differently than if I was at your height. And also because I'm older, I've got different experiences that interpret what I'm seeing in the world as well. So the notion that we have to find out who and where our players are at to build from there is that constructivist notion. So we've seen the shift from behaviorism to constructivism. So if we're operating in very general terms, maybe winding that up, if we're operating from that constructivist perspective where we're putting the athlete, the player at the center of the process rather than the coach thinking, what am I doing today, to thinking, what do I want my players to learn today? And what will I see from my players to know that learning is occurring? And what will I have from them at different time points to indicate that learning has occurred? I then plan backwards from there what I'm going to do to enable those processes. Whereas when I first started my teaching and coaching, it was about my objectives, what I wanted to achieve as the teacher or a coach. That's a big shift.
And would you say that's been the biggest change for you in sport and coaching since you kind of got involved?
Yes, absolutely. There's a shift to what we might generally call athlete-centered coaching, student-centered learning from a teaching perspective, which is not this unfettered discovery. Just give them a ball and let them go and play. And my understanding of the research in education is that give them a ball and go out and play, they'll probably retrieve their existing skill sets. You know, the reason why we have a coach there is to enable those existing skill sets, and that means the way they think as well as their movement toolkit, is nudged towards something more complex or complete or addition to. If we're not doing that as a coach, there's no point in us being there. Just let them play. And sometimes some kids will intentionally improve their practice by mimicry because they see something they want to do. But yeah, the purpose of coaching is not to leave it to the character piece and the chance of the individual. It's to help everybody have that opportunity to grow and develop. So it is the biggest change that I've seen in coaching. While it's the biggest change in the philosophy of coaching, and it underpins many of the coaching courses at university and national sporting organisations, once it's back before, what we still tend to see is the coaches doing what we would describe as a behaviourist, coach-centred approach, because they don't know anything different. Because that's the way they were coached 20 odd years ago. So they can only replicate what they know.
And I guess that leads us then nicely on to the last question, which is, if you could change anything about youth sport to make it better for children and young people, what would it be? What would that silver bullet be?
Yeah, for me, that's quite straightforward. So we have a youth retention issue when the children get to the age where they go, Gary, you can't force me to go to training tonight. I don't want to go. And you're saying to your child, no, you must go. And you start to bribe them, cajole them, emotionally manipulate them, whatever it might be, because you think it's good for them to go. But ultimately, you can't get them there if they won't hop on the bike, go in the car, catch the bus. Now, that drop-off point used to be 13 or 14 years of age, but the research is telling us that the kids are now around about 12 are starting to have those conversations, because we've encouraged them to be more independent thinkers and understand themselves in ways that maybe kids previously didn't, when they were told to be quiet, compliant, and just get on with it. And they were chased by a big stick to make sure they could do it. If I want to go and play soccer, association football tomorrow, there's a group in the parklands just down the road, 50 to 55 years of age, and I can rock up on a Wednesday morning, have a kick around, get a huff and a puff, play a game of soccer. There's no scores, no one cares. It's just out there, have a go. Down at the local soccer club, if that's what I get joy from doing, I don't have that option as a 12-year-old. I'm either playing club soccer for premiership points or I'm not playing. So no wonder we lose kids, because the only kids that we still have playing the sport from 12 through to 16 are the competitive kids. But as a non-competitive adult who's in it for the recreation, the relationships, I've got plenty of opportunities for leisure time sport. The 12 to 18-year-olds, what have they got? Unless they go and join a mum or a dad in one of their teams, in a mixed netball team or a mixed soccer team, just for a bit of kick and catch, rest and relaxation relationships. So if we want more kids playing sport more often, to have more kids more active more often, we've got to provide different types of opportunity. Now, when I went to Teachers College in the 80s, that would have been called leisure activity. Some people are now calling it informal sport. We just don't provide that for the 12 to 18-year-olds. And then we wonder why they drift away and find something else to do and never come back. Or they become massive spectators of sports rather than active participants in sports, because we haven't provided the alternatives for them.
It's really interesting that you say that. It resonates with me so much. And even at an older stage in my life, like I'm 31 now, but I last played football competitively.
Older? Did you say an older stage of life?
No, I'm older than I was. I'm older than I was. Sorry, I don't mean to poke the bear there. I'll get down off that high horse. But I finished playing football when I was about 28, and because my experience of the sport didn't match what I wanted from it anymore. Like I just wanted to play. Like I enjoyed playing football, but the team that I played in, they just wanted to win, but they weren't very good, which is fine. Which is probably why I got picked, because I also wasn't very good. But at the end of a game, I'd come off, if we got beat, I'd still be smiling. They'd be like, "You don't care, Gary." I said, "Well, I do. I just care about getting as many minutes running around the field while my body is capable of doing it, because in 10 years' time, that might not be possible for me." And in the end, I was like, I don't want to be part of this. So now I play a lot of golf, or I go on a run, because I'm not subject to those pressures that take me away from the reason why I love the sports that I love.
Yeah, I get it completely. So that's the biggest thing that I would change. Plus, I'd take the sport to the kids. That 4 till 6 p.m. time slot, where it's not dark yet, and we've got an opportunity. That's typically peak physical activity time. So once they're off the premises and they're heading somewhere else, they've got to make a decision to go to training. Make it easy for them. Step straight out of school. There's the pitch. There's the activity. Just make it available. Make it easily available to them.
Absolutely. Shane, for the people who are watching and listening to us, where can they find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Easiest thing would be to Google Shane Pill at Flinders University, and that'll take you to the university's homepage profile for me, and my contact details are there. You can also find me on Twitter at Pilly66.
Marvelous.
Or through LinkedIn. I guess LinkedIn's the other one. I tend to spend more time on LinkedIn these days than Twitter.
Safer space, right?
I just noticed a different type of engagement on LinkedIn than to Twitter.
Shane, thank you so much for your time with us, of what is early morning in the UK, but early evening in Australia for you. It's been great to have you on board.
Thank you. And the irony is that when this finishes, I'm off to do some coaching.
Absolutely.